Hello, everyone. So, welcome from Amsterdam, Heartcore-Lab. We're in the lab. It's like a place in Amsterdam at the north, a very iconic space, as you just saw in a video of Kareem. Together with Els, you already saw her in her keynote talk this morning, and me too. So what we're going to do in this session is we're going to have a fireside chat about why to bring the heart back into law firms. And just to give you a little bit of a frame, Els, you gave a keynote about why to bring the heart back in law firms. And it's also part of your research with your INSEAD Masters. It has also a relation with what we do in Heartcore, bringing the heart back in business. So can you give our audience a little bit of a heads up about what you talked about during your first keynote and why they really should stay here in this session?
Sure. I'll try to keep it in a few minutes for maybe the people that were also on this morning and watch a keynote. I indeed studied law firms, and I studied them from the what we call the system psychodynamic perspective. And that basically means that you don't only look at the surface and the things that are in the daily reality and the rationality of people, but you also look beneath the surface. And it's a way of looking not only at law firms, but at organizations in general. And it helps to explain so many apparent paradoxes that you might encounter in your daily life, both professional and personal. Maybe to start with an anecdote, and one of the people that I interviewed, he was a partner at a big law firm in the Netherlands. He spoke about another partner he knew well, because it's always easier to speak about someone else than about yourself, and I'll get back into that in a while. But he said this partner had been in a conflict with another partner who was actually in the office, well, pre-COVID at least, directly next to him. And they were in this conflict for 20 years. And the conflict impacted them both negatively. They were less successful in their practice, and emotionally it had really an impact on them. And what they did was send angry emails from one computer to the next, and they were next to each other.
Sitting here.
Yeah, like this. They would be sending, and they weren't just walking into the office next door and having a heart-to-heart conversation and addressing full-on the conflict that was getting in the way of both of their work. And when I see a situation like that, it sparks my curiosity, because why would they not just do that? It seems so simple. But when things don't happen, even though they seem so simple, there's something going on that we might not see at the face of it, but it's going on underneath the surface. And that's impacting the behavior of these individual partners, or maybe there's a systemic force from the law firm itself that's making them show things that don't seem to make sense. So that was basically the starting point of my investigation. And I interviewed 15 people or 30 people from 15 law firms to gain more insight into this. And just to wrap up, maybe, with two examples, the outcome of my investigation is when you want to manifest change, whether that's in a law firm or another organization or another group of people collected together, what you find is at the individual level, the unconscious of everyone, the things we're not aware of, the things that are underneath the surface, are impacting your daily behavior. Whether you like it or not, and whether you understand it or not, it's going to play a part. The same is true for a group level. The group dynamics, what really goes on in groups, is a lot of it is not on open display. It's what we feel, it's how we act, but it's not necessarily clear or rational or understandable in that way. And then a law firm or another organization as a system also has its own forces that are impacting the people operating in it, making them sometimes do things that don't seem logical, but that is how it goes. It's also what culture is sometimes. It's just how it goes here. This is how we do things around here. Those can also be systemic forces working into people. So just to give two examples really quickly on how individual lawyers can be, what came out of my research. Lawyers, almost by any qualification, are always called very bright, intellectual, smart, and very driven. So they say about themselves, they work hard, they play hard. So at the same time, they also turn out to be quite cautious. Even though driven, they're also cautious, and they're conservative, and they're actually pessimistic. And that doesn't sound like a quality you like to say about yourself, but it's actually a quality that comes from the professional programming of lawyers. They're paid by clients to make sure all the risks are covered. So they have to know where the risks are and have to find appropriate mitigation of those risks for the client from a legal perspective. So they look for risks professionally, except when they do that professionally, it also goes into the behavior on how they act in the firm. So it means that almost any plan or change or cultural aspect of the firm that's presented as something we want to do towards the future is approached with the same pessimism. And if you go about change projects in law firms or in other organizations and you ignore the pessimism, you're probably not going to succeed. So in my study, I found that you should be aware and acknowledge both sides of the equation, the rational, explainable, above the surface, and the unconscious, not so linear, not so explainable or rational. And that really helps you to manifest change in law firms. I think that is, in a few minutes, a little more
Yeah,
the conclusion of my outlook.
So I can sense your heart is really in this topic, and that's a good thing. But what is your biggest motivation, or what was your biggest motivation to choose this topic for your INSEAD Masters in Change?
Yeah, so I studied international human rights.
Yes.
Maybe a classic example also of people of our generations, yeah, who are quite, have a clear vision of what they want to do, what they want to put into the professional world. Mm-hmm. So I actually saw myself working maybe as a judge on the European Courts of Human Rights or advocacy or something else. And I ended up, and it's hard to explain to myself why, but at the biggest law firm actually in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And my reason for studying law was gone pretty quickly. And it's not because those environments are bad places, because I think law firms are often a collection of super talented, motivated, great, amazing people, except they're not necessarily doing there what they set out to do. Mm-hmm. So it fascinated me that it happened to myself. And I looked at the people around me when I was still in the law firm, and I saw it happening to other people. And when I started doing interviews for my investigation, I found out a lot of people have this feeling. Mm-hmm. And it's not to abandon what goes on there altogether, but how can we bring it back? How can we, the feeling, the passion people have for the law, and how the law can help people today and in the future, also in new ways. Yeah. How can we reinsert this in these great organizations that have a little bit lost their way?
Yeah. And you were a lawyer, say 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
How do you sense that the problems that you felt like back then are maybe the same today, or maybe slightly different? Can you say something around that?
Yeah, so for my investigation, I spoke to 30 people, but I also just have a lot of people who are still in these type of environments or close to these environments. Mm-hmm. And I actually found that maybe the problems, they haven't gotten less and maybe have even gotten worse. Mm-hmm. And I spoke this morning also about a trend that's taking place in a lot of law firms where the narrative has become quite financialized. Mm. So lawyers are the guardians of the rights and liberties in the society. Mm-hmm. They have an ethos for public service, but there's also a lot of commerciality in law, which is not a bad thing. It's also business. But it feels like the tipping point of what dominates. Mm-hmm. Commercial market logistics versus professional fiduciary duties is tipping even more towards the commercialization or the financialization. Mm-hmm. So it feels almost like more than 10 years ago, this is a problem. And people get into an internal conflict with themselves mm-hmm. sometimes about it as well. Like, what should prevail? How many hours I bill? Mm. Or what am I putting into society? How am I taking up a societal role? And it can become a bit of a dilemma, and it's not getting less.
And like in that dilemma, what's really missing right now in those law firms?
Yeah, I think a lot of people know what they would like it to be. Mm-hmm. So they can reimagine, even within the system of the current law firms, a new reality. or a changing, developing reality. And a lot of people feel they don't have the power or the impact. They need to change it themselves.
Or the guts.
Also that, because that's what I noticed when I interviewed people. And that's also maybe an important takeaway from my findings. A lot of people have a lot of anecdotes about others. And there's plenty of anecdotes. I have a bucket of anecdotes about my time in the law firm. But the honest situation is, I'm also part of the anecdotes. I participate in situations that are not the solution, but are part of the problem. So I think it's about guts, and it's about looking at yourself, honestly. Looking at the parts of yourself that maybe you don't like. So maybe you look at yourself as a lawyer and think, I'm super smart and driven and ambitious, work hard, play hard. But the pessimistic, I don't know, the cautious, I don't know. But it's all part of us. Generally speaking of lawyers, both parts are part of it. And if you look at both parts, you also know both parts are going to play a role in whatever you encounter. So it's guts, it's self-reflection and introspection as well. And when you do that, you can encourage other people to do the same. And it will generate a new type of conversation.
And do you believe that lawyers these days are equipped with how to gain that consciousness about what's really necessary right now in this moment, or what's holding me back from showing courage to maybe change the system, or that it first starts within? Do you believe they are equipped, yes or no, or what's maybe necessary?
Yeah, I don't think the study prepares you well for that, at least not in the Netherlands where I'm familiar with it, because it's a very cognitive, rational-based, head-based study. So you learn to be super analytical, you learn to use language in your favor, you learn to convince, you learn to structure arguments, you learn to write really well. But all of that doesn't necessarily help this. And law firms, I mean, I just told you, lawyers are conservative, so law firms also by definition are kind of conservative as well. And for a long time, this kind of stuff, it's been like soft skills, people skills, and people think it's important, but it will always take a back seat to the real work, which is work for clients, which is also billable work.
And hard work.
Yeah. And I think increasingly, more and more people are realizing there's more to your work than only your competences and your skill set and your intellect. So if you bring your heart to work, if you have your head, I mean, don't lose your head, you need it for law, but also have your heart. It makes you a better lawyer.
And I really sense that the narrative is changing, because also we heard Anja and Margaret say in the opening talk, they referred to our talk, Bring the Heart Back in Law. But also if I see all the topics in this weekend, like it's transformational, it's like it's coming from such a new kind of future-based perspective. And I really feel that a lot of people feel the urgency and the need to come from heart, like a heart-centered place, like a more embodiment practice. So that this narrative is going to help also law firms, that is, if these stories come to the outer world, that it will probably change the engagements that we have, or maybe the conversations that we have during lunch or dinner with each other.
For sure, because I think also if you're connected well to yourself, it helps you to connect to others in a new way. And I think lawyers connect super well because they know language and they connect from head to head super well. And it's also important. So I'm not trying to say that's no longer important. But if you add the heart to it, and I connect to you from a heart connection, it adds so much. And it does something different for your body.
What did you really sense? Because you became part of the Heartcore tribe, like say a year ago. We met each other over sports, and then we started, hey, we have something in common, and that's our work. But you come from a law background, and I'm from a corporate background. What changed for you when you heard about Heartcore-Lab, its mission? What happened inside of you? Maybe something you didn't know yet, or that you recognized?
Yeah, I think so. I was missing something in my professional life for part of my professional life. And with missing, you know, sometimes comes to you don't know what it is, right? Maybe only afterwards you know what it is. But there's something inside of you that feels like it should be better than this, right? It could be better than this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I was promised something different than this. And I had my own professional journey and looking for different things to do. And that took me closer and closer, I think, to this realization. That there's just a big component of myself that I wasn't putting into my work. I was maybe putting it into my private life, but not into my work. And then when we connected and you gave words to what I didn't really know I was missing, I thought, yes, that's it. And not just for me, but for so many people that I know professionally.
Yes.
And it can be something, I mean, it's not exactly the same for everyone, because it's bringing your heart also into work. It's the heart, but also your heart. And what's in my heart is not in your heart.
Sure.
But it is bringing our hearts into work.
Yeah. And how do people respond to the transition that you made, to the stories that you now tell? And also, if you talk about your research, bringing the heart back in law firms, how do your friends and law friends respond to you about this topic?
They like it. They like the energy that it's given me. When I speak about this, people see the fire, right? They see the energy. And people love energy. Yeah. So they see it did something to me, which they like. They're like, they're interested always, inspired sometimes, but it can be, these types of words are not common in this space, not as much as they are going to be. I'm sure they're going to be. So sometimes it can feel a little like awkward, or like, ooh, I don't know if I can talk about the heart in my law firm. I need to talk about the Supreme Court, or, you know, but the heart, I don't know. So, but they can,
it's a kind of a bit scary to talk about.
They need to step into the unknown. This is not their territory necessarily. And like I said, the education doesn't prepare you well.
No, true. No, but like none of their education these days, right?
No. So it's, I like to speak to people who are still now in law firms. I mean, because they're my friends, and I wish them well. And they're the people that maybe from the inside also can create a change. If they want that change, they don't have to create my change, but they can create their own change.
Sure.
But sometimes they're looking for like, how's a good way to do that? And then I try to help them. Yeah, and
about the how, if like people watch this story or our talk, or maybe afterwards, what do people really need to acknowledge within themselves, and maybe also within their firm, to make this change happen, or this shift?
Yeah. So I think what I said in the beginning, that there's things that are underneath the surface that impact your daily reality.
Yes.
And for lawyers, that can be difficult because they are trained to be able to have like logical arguments. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. That's how you explain things to a judge, and then a judge either tells you you're right or you're wrong, but that you're really programmed to do that. And basically, if you look at the law firms from a system psychodynamic perspective, you also have to acknowledge there's A leads to Y, leads to P, leads back to A, and then maybe to, so it's not easy, but it plays a part. So better you understand and acknowledge and be aware of it. Whatever in your firm or your organization are the dynamics that are dominant, but just dare to look. Dare also to look at what may hurt, because it's not always pretty. Not for your firm, not for yourself personally. So you have to face that in the mirror as well. So there's like acknowledge, be aware. And then once you have that portion of it, then it's still not easy. You know, change is not easy. No. Even if you have
never
this.
Ending.
Also, so I think there's 3 things that are important as well. Once you have the awareness and the acknowledgement, and you're able to have the conversations around that with the people involved, you need the courage to overcome the obstacles that are going to scatter your path to change, because
Yeah.
they're going to be there. That's
For sure.
that's a fact.
Yes.
I think you need the creativity to do things differently.
Yes.
And I think then you need the compassion to negotiate together with the people who are involved what is going to be the new normal. Because for you, I'm maybe a little more ready for the change than you. So I need to show compassion to where you are.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we can't do it together.
Yeah. That's a beautiful message about that compassionate part and the courage. And that relates also to the work that we do together with Heartcore and that we want to spread out to the world. And I'm just checking time because we wanted to gain some time on the schedule. So I want to check maybe a last question and check the chat if there are some questions happening here. So if there is a moderator that can help us on the other side, if there are questions with people watching, the chat is open right now. Can have them, so I will check my list.
Could I maybe jump in and ask a question?
Oh, for sure, do that.
Hey, I'm wondering, what is it really gonna take, you think, for people to be vulnerable enough to tap into their own hearts and do so on a big level? You know, because it's not, you know, though it's simple, it's not an easy thing to do. So, you know, what is it really going to take?
So it is not easy, exactly. And maybe that is the first step, is also to know it will be difficult. So you don't get scared from the first resistance that you feel. I believe, and we believe that everyone has inside of themselves their own wisdom, and they create courage around that. So I think it starts with yourself, but also courage within yourself. So like I said, the introspection, looking at yourself. If you're coming from a space that's stable for you, if you have from our embraining technique, we would say if you're coherent, if you know who you are and what you're trying to do. Even though you're facing scary situations, you'll find ways, and for some people that's breathing, or it can be any other type of way, that also from a bodily perspective, you can approach difficult or scary situations in your best way. So it's also about finding your way that helps you approach those situations from your own wisdom and your own courage. So it is a bit individual, but everyone has the capacity. That's the good news.
Yes. And you said between sentences, you mentioned embraining. For people that don't know that phrase, it's a coaching methodology called multiple brain integration technique. So neuroscience has proven that we don't only have a beautiful brain inside our head over here, but also in our heart and in our guts. And that's about what Els talked about aligning those three brains to make wise decisions in life. So if there's something that's holding you back from making change happen in your field, or the safety is like, it's scary, it's a scary place, something is holding you back, then what do you do? And like I did a transition launch about heart coherence. And just to give you this as a presence, like if we are in frustration, then our heart rate, if we would measure it and show it, it would go like this, like very intense. You can imagine that. So coherence means it's more like a wave. It goes with the flow. So you can imagine that if you communicate from that perspective, from coherence, that you will be far more effective than from the frustration side. And I believe that if we are continuously in stress in law firms, I can imagine how hard that work is. Then like it's different, and then maybe you don't have space or mind space or body space to make that change happen, right? So yeah, maybe we're transitioning into a new era of people to create more space to allow yourself to do this work for yourself first,
Yeah.
and then for others then to make the change happen together with others.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I'm just looking in the chat as well. I just see a question about a shortcut to change. It's always an interesting question. Through the leadership of law firms. Leadership is instrumental. I'm not sure if it's a shortcut, because I don't really believe there are actual shortcuts to change, but there are things that you can do that people will feel quite quickly. And then there's still a lot of work, because change is work. So you can't not do the work and still change. I mean, unless maybe you have some kind of like lottery type of situation.
Yeah.
But I mentioned this in my keynote as well this morning. There's Zafran has developed 3 laws of performance. And the third one is about language. If you talk about the language from a generative, or about the reality from a future-based language. So when the leadership of a law firm is talking to or writing to the rest of the law firm, and they use future-based language, so not that shows the change in and of itself. So the language becomes generative. It's been proven that changes both the speaker and the listener towards the future situation. So if you're actually in a law firm, the person who asked that question, you can look up the 3 laws of performance, and it gives more examples of how do you do that. How do you use language as a vehicle of change, and by using it, you're actually changing people. So if it's not a shortcut as such, it may be a bit of an accelerator if your leadership in your law firm is capable of doing things like that. On the opposite side of the shortcut is that if the leadership is not on board with what's trying to happen, then you're going to have a systemic force which is very difficult to counter. So
So and in relation to that, what do you hope the audience could start doing differently tomorrow?
So change starts with yourself in a way. But you have a role for yourself, you have a role in a team, you have a role in a firm. So I think being aware that the things you do, the responses you have to situations, also has drivers that are not clear to the eye, that are more subconscious, and being aware of how you are yourself, knowing yourself in a good way, helps knowing how you respond, and also what things you will encounter if change will happen, or if you're part of a change in your law firm. You know these are obstacles you're going to run into. I think be connected to yourself, and not just this part, but everything. So leave room for your body and your spirit. And work should be meaningful. Like make your work meaningful to yourself, and whatever that may mean. But don't just be doing work that's not meaningful. It should mean something to you. So make sure that you can look at yourself in the mirror and say that to yourself. And that'll put you on a path, whether it's in your current role or new roles in the future, where you at least know you're using yourself and your wisdom and your compass to go in the right direction.
And then you probably also have more, like you already make contact to the courage in your system to drive that change.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think, and we will talk about this tomorrow with Bruce Cryer, showing love at work is actually a source of energy. It boosts you. So if you bring love to your work or bring heart to your work, suddenly, and this has also been proving scientifically, it just has a biological effect.
True.
Sickness will go down. So you're only helping yourself as well by doing it. So you will notice a difference, and maybe you have a little bit extra energy coming from there.
So
that'll help you face the obstacles.
So maybe we need to go from law firms to love firms. Okay, let me check if there's one last question. I don't think so. I believe
there is one.
We had one.
Oh yeah. How specific are the findings to law firms? I think was one of the questions.
1 minute. Then we need to go.
I study law firms specifically, so
Yeah.
some of my findings about how lawyers are specific to lawyers. So the pessimism is quite specific to lawyers, but every group of professional will have their own programming and their own characteristics. So I think what's not specific to law firms is be aware that a lot of the things that you see happening come from a place that you don't see. That is not unique to law firms, but it goes for every group of people, also in a non-professional setting. Yeah. So, and dare to look there, explore there,
and ask
speak
questions
to each other, learn from each other. Don't assume. Ask to learn.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Shall we wrap it up with that? Ask to learn.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Els, for your beautiful insights on your research on why to bring the heart back in law firms. And thank you all for joining us on this talk, on this fireside chat. And just to say that tomorrow we're going to host a play shop together with Bruce Cryer. And it's all about heart coherence and go into the depth of these conversations. So we hope to see you again tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.